Hello, I'm Gustavo Solis, border and immigration reporter here at KPBS, and today we're talking with Austin Kocher from Syracuse University. Austin, you have this really cool Substack that's, I think, becoming a go to resource for folks who follow immigration policy, which is why I wanted to have you on today. So, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I want to talk about some of your recent posts on that Substack. One of them is you wrote about how government agencies can shape public narratives through selective data releases, and sometimes how reporters like me parrot those narratives. So, as an example, we have these social media posts from ICE. Tell us a little bit about what we're looking at and what could be problematic about this.
Sure. So, in the first week of the Trump administration, in an effort to show and to highlight the immigration enforcement activities that the administration was taking, ICE began posting numbers on their Twitter page that showed growing numbers of arrests and detainers. The first time I saw this, I thought, first of all, I'm a big advocate of government transparency. So, nothing I love to see more than data. So, potentially great. However, there was no context or information about the data so it really didn't allow us to look at what the norm was before Trump took office in a way that would have allowed us to compare then what's happening afterwards. So that was one red flag for me. The other red flag for me when I saw this was knowing how long it takes the agency many times to produce this data, even though they do have some internal dashboards and so forth. I was concerned that the data wasn't really getting validated. So even the numbers that we're looking at, my concern was, did they really take the time to make sure those are correct? Believe it or not, the data systems that the government uses, they're huge, they're enormous, they're very dynamic. And so there really does need to be some validation to make sure the numbers are correct. But the big picture concern here is I'm pretty familiar with this data, so I am aware of some of the issues associated with these data points and that make me skeptical of it. But I know that not everybody is in the weeds with this data as much as I am, and so it could create the misperception about what's going on. And really, the big picture problem here that I think everybody needs to be aware of is that even though it's great when government agencies post data, if they're not taking the time to do it accurately and to do it responsibly, it runs the risk of data being used to advance a political agenda more than actually provide meaningful transparency to the American public.
Well, thanks for that. That brings us to like the second question, right? How so we know data can be used to create or yeah, create false narratives. But as a reporter, one of my favorite things to do is correct misleading narratives. And you kind of did that recently when it comes to who ICE is arresting, right? So the prevailing narrative coming out of the White House is that they're arresting the worst of the worst, right? The bad hombres, the murderers, and the rapists. But is that what the data show?
The data is really inconsistent on this, and so it doesn't necessarily support the government narrative at all. The government's not really backing up those claims with data points. We don't have detailed case by case data on the people that they've arrested. They could release that data, but they haven't yet. What we do have is a spreadsheet that Congress requires ICE to produce on a biweekly basis. I've looked at this data very carefully and closely over the last several years. So I feel very comfortable with the data. And what this data shows is based on the number of people in detention at any given point in time, which has gone up. We've gone from about 38,000 people up to around 43,000 people in detention at any given point in time. And when we look at that breakdown, what we see is yes, a majority, the largest fraction of people in immigrant detention are people with criminal convictions. However, the number that has grown the most, which shows relative growth and which shows possibly who ICE is really focusing on, are people that don't have any criminal convictions and don't have any pending criminal charges, but actually only have criminal violations.
Yeah, so tell me what we're looking at here with the graph, right? They're like, what should people be focusing on? I see like other immigration violator, convicted criminal.
Sure. So, ICE has a lot of detailed data on detainees' criminal histories, but the data that they report to the public in this spreadsheet really just breaks it down into three categories. immigrants held in detention with convictions, people who have criminal convictions. And let's be very clear about what it means to have a criminal conviction. This could be anything from, a theft, stealing something from a grocery store and getting in trouble, all the way up to potentially murder. So even that convicted criminal category represents a huge variety of people. It also may include people with criminal convictions that are years, sometimes even decades old, not people who represent any kind of real public threat. So we can't assume that convicted criminal necessarily means a real public safety threat, but that's what convicted criminal. Same with pending criminal charges, people who don't have convictions but just have charges. And then the last category, other immigration violator, that's what ICE refers to as people who have immigration violations but don't have criminal charges or convictions.
And as you can see, right, it went from 800 in January to almost 5,000 now. Like that's a big jump, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And so what I'm looking at is trends, not just the breakdown at any one point in time. What I'm looking at as a researcher and someone who focuses on this data is I'm looking at these three categories and just saying, where is the main growth happening? Because that is a little bit of a signal to me and hopefully to other people that, oh, this is where ICE is putting their efforts. So that's right. So we saw, when Trump took office, the smallest portion was other immigrant violator with 800 or 900 people in detention at that one point in time, followed by the next largest group, criminal charges, and then the largest group is convicted criminal. Now, when we look at the percent of that on the right, we look at the breakdown, that's really where we can see that change. And so we see that the lowest level of offender, immigrants with only an immigration violation, went from 6% of the detained population back at the beginning of January up to then 18% of the detained population by the beginning of March. Whereas the percent of convicted criminals in detention as a overall percentage of the population, that has actually gone down from 62% to under 50% now. So this is a very predictable pattern. Broadly speaking, one of the things I wrote about in my Substack was I said, look, this is what's going to happen. We've seen this happen many times over my career. There really aren't enough immigrants in the United States who have serious criminal convictions that the Trump administration could drive their detention and deportation numbers solely by focusing on that. I mean, the simple data reality is they're going to have to focus on people who don't have serious criminal convictions if they want to reach millions of deportations. It's just sort of the reality. So it's fairly predictable what we're seeing happen, but it certainly does run contrary in some cases to what the administration is claiming.
One of your most recent reports is about ICE detention numbers and how Congress approved $430 million to increase capacity. Do we know how the federal government plans to spend that money? Does it tell us anything about who they plan to target?
No, I'm not clear on where they plan on spending all $430 million or how they plan on dividing it up. The truth is, immigration enforcement's very expensive. It costs taxpayers a lot of money, in addition to the economic costs of deporting people that we need in our workforce. So that $430 million, I'm sure ICE is going to use, and actually, let me just also say that's $430 million on top of the normal budget that they already have. So it's really a bonus that Congress just gave to ICE. Detention's very expensive. Deportation flights are very expensive. Setting up a detention center in Guantanamo Bay and setting up tents and all of that's really, really expensive. Costs thousands and thousands of dollars to hold people, a day in that location. So ICE is running short on money if they're to accomplish what the Trump administration has claimed. And logistical challenges, frankly, are the main bottleneck. We've already seen ICE remove the existing ICE director, or we've seen Trump remove the existing ICE director because Trump wasn't happy with deportation numbers. And it's not because they don't want to do it; it's because they don't have unlimited resources. But this $430 million additional dollars, I'm sure that's going to go into detention. They're going to have to hire more staff. They're probably having to pay their ICE officers and their deportation officers overtime wages, which is going to cost a lot of money. And like I said, jet fuel is not cheap these days, and finding pilots to fly deportation flights to extrajudicial prisons in El Salvador and so forth, very expensive.
Yeah, you can see how it adds up with you count like just everything involved in mass deportations. Yeah.
Absolutely, very expensive project.
If anyone wants to follow you, like anyone in the audience, where can they keep up with your work?
Really, where I put most of my effort these days is Substack. So if you go to austinkocher.substack.com, I write, most days of the week. I've got new analysis out there, and what I really try to do there, like all of my social media engagement when I can, is really just to break down what's happening in our system in a very simple, nonpartisan way that tries to help more people not just understand what's going on, but try to take an interest in it out of a sense of curiosity. Because even though it's very polarizing, it's actually, human migration is a really interesting phenomenon, and I'm trying to reignite some curiosity and some mutual understanding, even if we don't always agree on the politics or the policy.
Great. Well, again, thank you for that. And thanks to all of you for watching. If you found this conversation insightful or helpful, please share it, leave a comment, and let's keep the conversation going.